So today, the fifth part of our Old Testament study is about God's covenant with Moses. So a couple of weeks ago, you may recall, we looked at God's covenant with Abraham. Last week, we looked at the Israelites' time in Egypt under captivity. And then today's will be about God's covenant with Moses. So as we learnt last week, the Israelites left Egypt, the city of Goshen, and their slave masters effectively gave them gifts, like parting gifts, and sent them on their way. And then as they were going through the desert, they came along the Red Sea, and Pharaoh had changed his heart, and he was chasing the people of Israel. So he was pursuing them with chariots, and a whole army was behind them, and in front of them was the Red Sea. We saw the Lord separated the Red Sea and helped them to walk across it on dry ground, and behind them their enemies were drowned. So at this point in time, the people of Israel are finally free. So it's almost the next level of freedom you can imagine. They're standing here on the shoreline, they see the Red Sea, and Egypt is far on the other side. And those who were chasing them at the time had been drowned. So you can imagine how free they felt, how liberated they were finally. Bless you. Thank you. So if we can imagine these Israelites are free now, so it's been 400 years, so it's highly likely that every single person in there had been a slave for their whole lifetime. So they're finally free, they're standing on the other side, their enemies are dead. They've seen all these miraculous signs, they've seen the hand of God within their lifetime. So this isn't something that they've heard from their forefathers, this is something that they've seen in their lifetime. So they know that this powerful God is with them and that he has saved them from the Israelites' hands. They are no longer slaves, but are free people. So you could think about what must be going through their heads at the moment. We've been slaves our whole lives. What is next? Where is this God taking us? They could probably be thinking, what are his intentions? Because all their lives they've been mistreated. They've been whipped. They've been forced in backbreaking labor. And they must be thinking, what does life look like next for us? And with this God, how's he going to treat us? So in the first leg of their journey, we see the Israelites traveling from the edge of the Red Sea to Mount Sinai. And along the way, as they're known for, they've already started complaining about water, about food, about what's around the corner. And we see God's provision there. He gives them fresh water through Moses' staff. The Lord breaks the rock and releases fresh water for them to drink. He rains bread from heaven called manna. Nevertheless, they still keep complaining about food varieties, the next topic. So they want some meat. And then to a point where they've even quarreled that much that they want Moses dead for leading them out of slavery. So these are people we read in the beginning of Exodus. They were being squashed by Pharaoh. They were being very mistreated. They've been slaves their whole life, and now they've got freedom. They're wanting to go back to captivity. They're wanting to go back. They prefer to go back to Egypt to be slaves than be free and people of faith. So when they get to Mount Sinai, God gives them a bit more explanation on his intentions. Those questions that we sort of asked earlier, what are God's intentions? What does he want to do? And what are his plans for these people? So if we read our first verse, this is on Mount Sinai. So this is Moses went up to the mountain. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you out on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possessions among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people. So this is the instruction that the Lord gave to Moses to pass on to the people of Israel. So here we see God defines Israel. So in the first half there we see he tells them, I'm the one that rescued you, like, don't be fooled. You guys didn't do it on your own, or it didn't happen by coincidence. So he's the one that single-handedly brought them out of slavery. And he also says that they're his treasured possession. So here, he not only tells them about himself, but about them. So he gives them a sense of identity here. Before you were slaves, before you were beaten, you were treated in an inhumane way. But now you are my treasured possession, he calls them. So the Egyptians treated you unfairly, but I want you to be my treasured possession. So we see that he's given them a really great identity. We see that he links them to himself, and that he wants to have a relationship with this people. And as we read this, we also see that these people can now be secure. They are treasured and they are protected. And as we go to the next passage, before they can form this relationship, before they can be close with God, there's a process. And if we read the next verse, the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people, and you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death." Here we see the notion of consecration being identified in the Bible, where God has told these people that they're a treasured possession. He wants a relationship with them. He wants to sort of move forward with them and sort of give them all the blessings that He's promised to their forefather Abraham. But before that can happen, there's a process of consecration. So we can think of it as being set apart for a specific purpose. So these people are a chosen nation, right? And they've got to now, in those 3 days, from when the first message came to when God comes down, they've got to prepare for this encounter. And as we read, so that includes washing their garments and getting ready. So he gives them 2 days to prepare, for on the third day he will come. So this process of consecration, it's a required step between a holy God and a sinful people. The Lord is holy, the Lord is without sin, and for Israel, a sinful people, to come to the holy God, they must consecrate themselves in those couple of days. So when we probably didn't have this verse up, but when the Lord does come, we see, the Bible tells us, the mountain was surrounded by smoke, lightning and thunder, and the glory of the Lord was clearly there. So as we read at the bottom, because it's holy ground, the Lord warns them, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. So here we see Moses is on the mountain, and we see the Lord entering a covenant with Moses here, Moses and Israel. So if we may recall, the covenant that was entered with Abraham was an unconditional covenant where it was more dependent on God. So Abraham was told that he'd be a great nation. He'd be given land in Canaan. He'd be blessed, and that blessing would be passed on to generations. So this covenant with Moses was effectively an extension of that covenant. It was several generations past, but it was extending on that covenant. Here, the Lord says that Israel, the former slaves, would be God's people, and God would be their God. and just forming that relationship. And these people would inherit the land of Canaan and be a blessing to all nations as promised to Abraham. For a holy God to bind himself to this sinful people, this is where we're introduced to the Ten Commandments. So the Lord sets his expectations of people. He gives them the Ten Commandments at the time. So they're mainly built around civil, religious, and moral values. And these were essentially the Ten Commandments, and under them sat over 100 specific laws, which you can read in Exodus. They're quite extensive. So these laws were like more of like a code of conduct, like they set precedents to enable judges at the time and the wise men to be able to rule fairly amongst the people and rule out any issues and sort of be fair. So in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, we see that Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament laws, and that we are no longer bound by them in New Testament as New Testament Christians. But I think it's important to note that these laws they really show us God's character. They really teach us lessons. So I think it's incorrect to fully rule them out, and there's a lot that we can actually learn from them, even though as New Testament Christians we may not be bound by them. So for example, there's one for harvesters. So when harvesters would go and reap the fields, one of the laws says not to scrape up every single thing, to leave some intentionally for as Deuteronomy says, the sojourners, the fatherless, and the widows. So really here we see a principle of sharing from your abundance. So if you're blessed with 100, giving 5 of it to the people in need, the fatherless, the widows, he says. And these principles are still current today. Even as New Testament Christians, we're called to take care of those who are in need. So as we see the covenant that the Lord is making with Moses here, we said earlier that it's an extension of the covenant that he made with Abraham. But we need to see 2 key differences here. So Abraham's covenant initially was unconditional. It was only dependent on God and not necessarily Abraham's actions, as we learned in Bible study a couple of weeks ago. However, this one with Moses had some conditions attached to it, where Israel would be promised safety, blessings, the promised land, and then further to that, to be a blessing to all nations. And there was an if they were faithful to observe God's law. So these 10 commandments and the 100+ laws that went with them. So faithful obedience. That didn't by any means mean that they had to be perfect and sinless, because people are with fault. And then the Lord had processes by which they can sacrifice and make atonement when they do fail. So the Lord created the laws, the 10 commandments, and he had all this process of sanctification, sacrificial system with atonement, and he prepared that for Israel at the time, and then we see that being communicated to them through Moses. So Israel had to hold up their end of the covenant here. So it was a 2-way arrangement here, unlike the covenant with Abraham. So if they did comply, if they did do what the Lord was telling them, we see that they would be showered with unimaginable blessings, things that probably no other nation at the time would have got, because they were the chosen nation on earth at the time. They're the sole representatives of God. And if they did not, they'd be faced with the consequences, curse, exile, it says. And unfortunately, in the rest of the Old Testament, we see Israel is unfortunately unfaithful most of the times, and we see them sort of reaping the consequences of their actions. So if we read the next verse. So Exodus 19, 5-6 says, "Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So it's dialogue from God to Moses. We'll just read that again. So, out of all the nations you'll be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So these people were not only treasured possessions of God, but they were also called to be priests and a holy nation. We'll just talk to that a bit more to see how much of a big responsibility that actually is. So we may recall when the Lord first came to Abraham, he made him a promise that all the families on earth would be blessed through him. So when he said all the families, he wasn't just talking to the Israelite families, he's talking to all the other nations in the world. It was a really big calling when the Lord spoke to Abraham initially. And as we said, this covenant is an extension of that calling, an extension of that covenant that he says to Moses here. He refers to them as kingdom of priests. So it's a separate calling. It's quite a heavy calling. A holy nation. They are called for priestly ministry from the beginning, we see. And if we sort of consider the responsibilities of a priest is effectively, in simple terms, someone who's between the people and God. So you can sort of think of him or her as a middleman. So the priest represents the holy God to sinful people, and vice versa represents sinful people to a holy God. So it really shows here the weight of their calling, what demand he had on them. So he's essentially saying to them, look, you are my representatives on this earth. I want you to show my character to other nations. I want my blessing to flow through you and to other nations. I want you, Israel, to stand out, to be set apart, to be clearly different, and not to be contaminated with the rest of the things that are going on around you. Effectively, to minister on God's behalf to the rest of the world, not just amongst themselves, but to the other nations, to the pagan worshippers, to the people who are astray from God's original plan. To be a light to those nations who are in the darkness, and to shine God's holy character on the world. So it's a big calling. So people who are called to such a big task, we see largely failing and being unfaithful. And we often see them not meeting the conditions of the covenant, and again, time and time again, we see them reaping the consequences of their actions. But through all this, as we'll progress through the Old Testament, we don't really see God's heart changing. After all they put him through, they still remain his treasured possession. So if we sort of bring it into our context today, so these people were commissioned to, one, show the world that the Lord is the one and true God, and to call other nations into a relationship with him. So if we sort of consider it in that light, as the verse in our vision, the Great Commission, Jesus has effectively called us to do a similar thing as New Testament Christians, to show the world that the Lord is the one and only true God, and to call other nations into a relationship with him. So these were the priestly callings from the Lord to the Israelite. So if we sort of bring it into today's context, really the Lord's heart is still the same. You know, he wants a relationship with each and every one of us. And he wants us not only be blessings for ourselves and our families and our local community, but also to the lost, to those who are in need, his other creations, his other children, his other sons and daughters. So really, he's calling us today to be his representatives still, and to join him in saving other souls. To reach the lost, to intercede, to be those priests, to be that middle point between the sinful people and the holy God, to really intercede, for those who are suffering and lost.